Good afternoon. A big warm welcome from Dallas, Texas. I am your host today, Mariam Baig. I am the Director of Marketing and Special Events at Human Rights Initiative of North Texas. First of all, we just want to take a moment to recognize the 17 Haitians who drowned off of the coast of Bahamas just this past Sunday. The Bahamian police and defense forces responded to reports of a boating accident shortly after 1 a.m. on Sunday, and rescue teams recovered 17 bodies from the water. It was a boat carrying Haitian migrants bound for the United States. This comes at the heels of just last month when, in late June, 46 believed to be migrants were found dead in a tractor trailer and 16 others were taken to hospitals Monday in a remote part of San Antonio. This is just the latest in the string of migrants who put their lives in peril, trying to arrive in safety in better conditions for various reasons, from human rights abuses that they're trying to escape, from life-threatening situations that they are trying to find safety from. And it is just another side of immigration that we might see on our televisions, read in our newspapers, along with myriad terms and policies and processes that may not be as easy to access, to understand, if you are not heavily ingrained in the immigration debate. In April 2021, the states of Texas and Missouri sued the Biden administration to reinstate Remain in Mexico policy. How many of us know what Remain in Mexico policy is? On July 16, 2021, a judge sitting on the U.S. District Court for Southern District of Texas ruled that DACA is unlawful. DACA, now there's a term that we hear, and some of us know about it. And just 40 miles from downtown Dallas, from where we are broadcasting live right now, On the Air operates ICE deportation flights nearly every day, upon which shackled, chained, and body-wrapped migrants are deported in the name of Title 42. While the rest of the country and the world watches Texas wondering, what are you doing? Welcome to Human Rights Initiative of North Texas, where our mission is to serve vulnerable migrants and refugees with 100% free legal and social services. We believe that immigrant rights are human rights, that family belong together, and that asylum is legal. Good afternoon from the heart of Texas. I will be your moderator for today. My name is Mariam, and it is my honor to introduce you to the HRI team of warriors who have made it their daily work to serve vulnerable migrants and refugees at the receiving end of the cruel and inhumane policies our government keeps issuing. I would first like to create a map of what we will be discussing today. To do this properly, it is my pleasure to introduce you to my colleague, Callie Cohn, who's the Director of Community Education and Advocacy. Callie, help us map this.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. Today, as Mariam talked about, we're going to be talking about what's been happening in the immigration policy context. And that discussion means that we'll be talking about some different immigration-related programs. But it's hard to understand how all of this is connected when we don't have a broader framework of how it fits in. So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes building a container that we can use to imagine how everything fits together. So when we talk about immigration, we're necessarily talking about crossing borders. Some of those are imaginary lines drawn and negotiated between countries. Sometimes those are physical lines that are actually physically drawn at the customs booth. Sometimes those are the places where the ocean meets the shore. But in this world where we live, we can't cross those lines without some form of permission. And that permission is what underlies the immigration system. So we like to talk about those permissions in buckets. And so I'm going to share a little bit of a graphic here to help us think through this. So the first bucket here is permanent legal status. So that means that the United States said someone can live here as long as they want to. So all citizens have permanent legal status, and so do all green card holders. Almost everyone else who comes into the United States comes on what we call temporary status. So that means the person has permission to come, but they have to leave after some amount of time. So if you've ever had a tourist visa or a worker visa, those are the most common examples of this category. But there are lots of different kinds of temporary visas. In general, people have to get these visas ahead of time. So the other thing to know about these visas is that not everybody who comes to the United States stays in that status permanently. And so when somebody jumps from one box to another, immigration attorneys call that adjusting status, but the rest of us call that a pathway to citizenship. And only certain kinds of status create that pathway. Unfortunately, there is no pathway for the last category, which is people in the United States with no status. So sometimes those are people who crossed the border. They made it safely to the United States undetected. Sometimes those are people who came on that temporary visa we talked about before, but their visa ran out. Sometimes people continue to live in this box in the United States without any other protection or classification. And sometimes they qualify in limited situations for another program. So Mariam mentioned DACA earlier. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, a program for young people who are brought to the United States as children. Temporary protected status is another example of this, which is a country-specific program for people who are here in the US when an environmental or humanitarian disaster befell their country. But in general, these temporary programs mean that the government, the US government, says, we know you're here, and the government may avoid deporting them, but they don't have any formal legal status. They have no pathway to citizenship and no permanent protection in the country. So then what happens when somebody crosses the border without a piece of paper that says they can come? They have no way to cross that imaginary line, that drawn-on line, that geographically marked line. And so that's where the humanitarian protections of our immigration laws come in. And that's because we, as a country, made a commitment to say there are certain situations where people should be allowed to stay in the United States, even if they didn't have permission ahead of time. And then ultimately, if somebody succeeds in that quest, they move from that no legal status box into that temporary legal status box. So when we talk about what's happening at the border, we're talking about people who have no piece of paper, but they have a right under international law to make a claim for asylum, to say, if I go back, I am in danger, I will be persecuted. And they have the right to make the case to move into that temporary box. When we talk about people who qualify for a U visa, we're talking about people who have no formal legal status, but they qualify for another humanitarian program that allows only just 10,000 people a year to move into that temporary box if they experience one of a handful of serious crimes. But when we talk about people with DACA, we're talking about people in that third box with no formal legal status who know no other country as their home. And when we talk about the millions of people who have raised families in the United States, who have worked their lives to build this country, who are American, all in but their passport, we are talking about people in that third box who have no access to temporary legal status. So today, you'll hear from folks on our team about changes that are affecting how people can access the different protections in these buckets or get into these buckets in the first place. And you'll also hear from my colleague Brenda about urgent things we need your help with to stop human rights abuses. But ultimately, everything we're talking about today is how people can travel through this purposefully difficult and convoluted system to be able to live their lives safely together with their families. How people can get into these boxes so they can live a life that's more free. And while we need to make things better and more livable along the way, as my colleagues will discuss, what we really need to be asking ourselves is, why do we make it so hard to get into these boxes in the first place? So that's our container. I'll pass it back over to Mariam and my colleagues to talk in more specifics. Thanks.
Thanks, Callie. We have all the boxes, we have all the containers, and we are ready to bring you into the discussion. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, please leave them in our comments section and we will get to them and answer them as best as we can. Thank you so much for joining us today as we examine the evolution, the trajectory of immigration policies under the Biden administration. We will briefly go over various topics, our various buckets and boxes with the HRI team, and we invite you to join the conversation through comments and questions in the chat. So first of all, let's talk about DACA. What is DACA? DACA is called the DREAM Act or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Almost 800,000 young undocumented migrants who came to America as children have lived here since at least 2007 and met other requirements are recipients of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, through which they qualify for temporary protection from deportation and legal work authorization for a renewable period of 2 years. DACA, which created our dreamers, have become center stage recently as on July 16th, 2021, a judge sitting on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas ruled that DACA is unlawful, but the court allowed people with DACA to continue to renew. The court blocked USCIS from processing first-time DACA requests. In September 2021, the Biden administration appealed the decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and the oral arguments were recently heard on July 6th. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Ms. Naomi Rios, our Crime Victims Program case manager in our Social Services Department. Naomi, thank you for joining us today and sharing your brain with us. Can you tell us where DACA stands now? Oh, it looks like we have a slight technical issue where Naomi had to drop off. No worries, we will bring her back in, but we will continue our conversation for another bucket. So let's move on to our next bucket that we want to talk about, which is Title 42 and refugee bans. And for this, let me give you a little background. So the United States has long guaranteed the right to seek asylum to individuals who arrive at our southern border and ask for protection. But since March 20, 2020, both migrants seeking a better life in the United States and those wanting to apply for asylum have been turned away or expelled back to Mexico or their home countries. These border expulsions are carried out under a little-known provision of U.S. health law. Section 265 of Title 42, which the former administration invoked to achieve its long-desired goal of shutting the border to asylum seekers. It is my great pleasure, and I hope she's still online, to introduce you to Miss Cristina Morales, our Department of Justice accredited representative who takes care of our asylum program at Human Rights Initiative. Thank you for being here, Cristina. So let me just throw a question at you. What was the justification for this Title 42, and do experts agree that we need this policy?
Thanks, Miriam. So yes, despite the claim made by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, that this order was necessary from a public health perspective to protect the U.S., public reporting has shown that the policy originated in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, and the Trump White House reports indicate that CDC scientists expressed opposition to the invocation of Title 42, arguing that there was no public rationale to support it. So ever since then, public experts outside the CDC have continued to agree, arguing that while international borders largely remain open to other travelers, there is no need to turn away refugees and return them to their home countries or Mexico. So starting as early as May 2020 and continuing to the present, public health leaders have called on the CDC to lift the order. According to the experts, the fundamental problem with Title 42 expulsions is that they are targeted primarily at a small number of people seeking asylum at a time when other restrictions in place at ports of entry have been lifted. And so large numbers of people are still crossing the border daily. Sorry, Miriam, I'm unable to hear you.
Let me just repeat my question. Christina, thank you for that summation. I was just wondering, what is the practical impact of Policy 42, Title 42?
Yeah, so good question. Over 1.8 million expulsions under Title 42 have been carried out since the pandemic began. However, nearly half of those expulsions were of the same people being apprehended and returned back to Mexico multiple times. This is because Title 42 has led to a significant increase in repeat crossings at the border. Half of all single adults from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have been expelled to Mexico under Title 42, and they have been apprehended crossing the border again. So as a result, Title 42 has significantly increased overall border crossings. In fact, 1 in 3 apprehensions at the border since Title 42 expulsions began have been of a person on at least their second attempt to cross the border.
Gosh. Christina, you mentioned earlier about how the borders are open, people are traveling, we're allowed to go everywhere, most of us. Are there any particular communities that are being disproportionately impacted because of Title 42?
Yeah, good question, Miriam. So under an agreement reached with the Mexican government in late March 2020, the Border Patrol began sending to Mexico most Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduran, and Salvadoran families and single adults that they encountered at the southern border. The group of nationalities subject to expulsion to Mexico remained unchanged until recently in May 2022, when the Biden administration reached an agreement with Mexico to accept thousands of Cubans and Nicaraguans as well. But despite this agreement, there has been extensive documentation of individuals expelled to Mexico who do not fit with this category, including, as you were saying, Haitian asylum seekers. This policy did not, however, affect about 17,000 Ukrainian refugees who have arrived in the U.S. since Russian invasion. So what we're seeing is that these expulsions are overwhelmingly targeting people seeking asylum who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous, which is in sharp contrast to the administration's commitment to racial equity. The Biden administration has accelerated expulsions to Haiti despite the escalating armed violence there, which the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights observed in May 2022, quote, has reached unimaginable and intolerable levels in Haiti. So about 4,000 Haitians were expelled or deported on at least 36 flights in the month of 2022 alone, which is the second highest number of flights to Haiti during the Biden administration. DHS has disproportionately targeted Haitians for expulsion flights. As the New York Times noted in May 2022, quote, Haitians represented about 6% of the migrants crossing the border with Mexico, but occupied 60% expulsion flights. So basically saying that Haitians represent a small number of migrants crossing the border, but they are among the highest percentage of being returned back.
And since the conditions keep worsening in the country, they keep trying to escape life-threatening situations.
Right.
Well, Christina, lots of changes have been announced. Where are we now, and what still needs to happen?
Yeah, so the victims of the Title 42 policy have suffered predictable and grave human rights abuses. We need to remember that first and foremost. Human Rights First and other groups have tracked at least 10,300 reports of murder, kidnapping, rape, torture, and other violent attacks against people blocked in or expelled, removed to Mexico due to Title 42 since January 2021. Um, while the administration is contesting the recent district court preliminary injunction in the suit brought by state attorneys general, multiple media reports indicate that several senior Biden administration officials made the decisions to use the Title 42 policy during 2021. These legal, moral, and political miscalculations served to worsen the disorder at the border. It delayed the restoration of asylum at ports of entry, and ultimately, it provided the perpetrators of divisive rhetoric with a steady diet of inflated border numbers for their fear-mongering. This April, the CDC announced it would end Title 42 with an effective date of May. That decision is what triggered the litigation that I mentioned that was brought by the state attorneys general. And now the Biden administration is facing an injunction them from ending Title 42 right now. Meanwhile, this is happening. There is a second dueling court order from a different court prohibiting the administration from sending people back to persecution. So it is past time for a major course correction. The administration must do all it can to bring this failed policy, as well as the unfixable remain in Mexico policy that the Supreme Court ruled in early July. It needs to end and alleviate the harm inflicted to human lives. The courts and members of Congress should halt all attempts to prolong this travesty. In addition, the House of Representatives and Senate must remove the dangerous and counterproductive new House amendment, which violates U.S. refugee and immigration laws from the DHS appropriations bill before sending this final bill to President Biden. Basically, the big takeaway from all of this is that we really need congressional action to stop Title 42 to override the court order. And we also really need the administration's commitment to stay the course and not revert back to its pre-April political decision making to keep Title 42 policy in place.
Oof, Christina, gosh. Well, thank you so much for wrapping up that bucket for us. Title 42 continues to create immigration backlog at our borders, humanitarian crises have been created at our southernmost borders thanks to Title 42. And you're absolutely right. We cannot go to pre-April calculus. We must. The Biden administration must get rid of Title 42, which the experts all agree that is not necessary. Everyone's traveling. You know, why is this just for migrants? And why is this just for migrants and refugees of particular colors? I see that my friend Naomi is back. Woohoo! Welcome back, Naomi. Naomi, hi. We were talking about DACA when suddenly the technology gods took you away from us. And I was talking about how DACA is deferred action for childhood arrivals, where almost 800,000 young undocumented immigrants who came to America as children and have lived here since at least 2007 and met other requirements are a recipient of this visa status called DACA. Through this, they qualify for temporary protection from deportation and legal work authorization, which is renewable for a period of up to 2 years. Yes? Okay. So, however, DACA remains center stage in our conversations because last year on July 16th, a judge on the U.S. District Court for Southern District of Texas ruled that DACA is unlawful, but the court allowed people with DACA to continue to renew. The court also blocked USCIS from processing first-time DACA requests. I remember we were doing an immigration town hall around the same time last year, and we were just stunned at this decision and so worried for our documented family. In September last year, though, after our town hall, Biden administration appealed the decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and the oral argument was recently heard just on July 6th. So, Naomi, thank you for joining us. You are the Crime Victims Program case manager in our social services departments. Can you tell us, where does DACA stand now?
Thank you, Miriam. So like you mentioned, last year in July of 2021, responding to a suit by Texas and 8 other states, the U.S. District Court Judge Andrew Hansen directed the Biden administration to stop granting new requests made under the DACA program, which, like you mentioned, provides protection from deportation and work permits to undocumented immigrants who arrive to the U.S. mostly as children. This Judge Hannon, called the program illegal, saying that Obama exceeded his authority when he created the program through an executive order back in 2012. So 10 years ago, DACA has been around for 10 years. But at this given time, the program is still closed to new applicants, but we continue to monitor updates regarding the program.
All right. Well, thank you, Naomi. This is, of course, not good news for our friends who may be eligible for this program but are not able to access it because they are first-time appliers to this process. What does it mean for current DACA recipients?
For current recipients, also known as Dreamers, they do remain in the program. There is 470,000 immigrants, DACA recipients, who are enrolled and are still eligible to renew their 2-year work permits. But so this is at risk.
Yeah. So basically, if you are documented, please renew your applications. Please stay in the system. Please put your applications in the pipeline. And for those, it still remains unseen how DACA will fare, especially for first-time applicants. So, Naomi, what do you do? What do you tell HRI clients hoping to apply for DACA for the first time? Or how do you support DACA recipients?
Thank you, Miriam. Great question. So as a Crime Victims Program case manager, I have a few clients who are eligible for DACA under the initial program guidelines, but otherwise cannot apply to the program due to changes ordered by Judge Hansen. While our clients are waiting for legal relief, I tell them to remain hopeful that the program may grant work authorization and deferred action to new applicants once again. If DACA was reinstated to its initial program structure, HRI clients would obtain work authorization sooner than they would with bona fide determination as they wait for their U visa or VAWA to be granted. But fortunately, some of our CVP clients were granted work authorization and deferred action through DACA. But generally, I support our DACA recipients through case management to assist our clients in obtaining employment, job training, higher education, and also guiding them to become self-sufficient through acute financial assistance and referrals to community agencies.
Naomi, you're such a great reminder. We talk about all of these things continuously, and sometimes it just becomes second nature. But one of the things that I'm struck by every day is how the HRI staff is in first-person experience dealing with our clients, working with our clients, and seeing the kind of hindrances in their paths. It can really take a toll. So thank you for continuing to do the superb work that you do, along with our rest of our colleagues, and not given to the traumatic nature of the work. So thank you for being here, Naomi. I'm glad you're back.
Thank you.
Well, we have another bucket to explore now, folks. And the next bucket that I'd like to go with is U visa changes. So what is U visa? The U non-immigrant status, U visa, is set aside for victims of certain crimes who have suffered mental or physical abuse and are helpful to law enforcement or government officials in the investigation or prosecution of the criminal activity. Now, Congress created the non-immigrant visa with the passage of the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act, including the Battered Immigrant Women's Protection Act, in October of 2000, 22 years ago. The legislation was intended to strengthen the ability of law enforcement agencies to investigate and prosecute cases of domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking of non-citizens, and other crimes, while also protecting victims of crimes who have suffered substantial abuse due to the crime and are willing to help bring that criminal to justice. So this legislation also helps law enforcement agency to better serve victims of crime. It is my great honor to introduce you to the keeper of our Crime Victims Program, the amazing Department of Justice accredited representative, Ms. Zela Gonzalez. Zela, hi, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you, Mariam.
Let me just ask you an easy question. No, it's not easy. Why is there such a big backlog for U visas?
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question for U visas. So basically, U visas have a cap that has been set by Congress, and it limits the number of applications that can be approved each year. Now, currently that limit is set at 1,000. And during the first few years of the U visa program, that cap was not reached. People were not applying as much as they are now. But since 2011, that cap has been reached every single year. So currently, we are looking at about 170,000 pending U visa applications with USCIS, and that number grows every day. Meanwhile, the number of U visas that can be granted each year has remained the same at 10,000. So basically what that means is that if somebody applies for a U visa today, if they submit their application, they're looking at a wait time for a final decision of more than 12 years. And unfortunately, that only keeps growing.
Oh, 12 years, Zela?
Mm-hmm.
What is happening? And not to it's just not 12 years for your migrant who's waiting for this paperwork, but it's also a strain on USCIS who have to continuously deal with this backlog. Backlog actually makes us spend more money, folks. It does not allow us, to make anything better. So this $10,000 cap is being reached every year, but now the wait time can be anywhere between 1 to 12 years. All right. Well, if there is a statutory cap set by Congress, Zela,
Oh no, Mariam, I think we lost connection with Mariam. Let's just give her a minute to see if we can get her back. Looks like she's coming on, folks. Hang tight. Okay, so I think, apologize everybody. This is a live event and sometimes these things happen. So while we get Mariam back on, I think I know where Mariam was going next, is really if the government has control over this, how does our current administration, as I mentioned, Congress is the one that sets these caps. So how can our current administration help improve the backlog? So what our current administration can do is grant work authorization and protection from deportation for those people who are currently waiting and are here without documented status, provide protection from deportation. However, that has historically not been done in a reasonable amount of time because USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the arm of the government who reviews U visa applications, historically they have done a rather lengthy review of these applications, which takes time before they can even give an applicant a work permit or protection from deportation. So what we actually saw in progress was that people were waiting about 4 to 5 years after submitting an application to just receive that work permit and that protection from deportation. Now, last year, our current administration, the Biden administration, they created a new process, what they called the bona fide determination process. And what that does is it allows USCIS to give work authorization and protection from deportation to people who have their U visa applications pending, but they do it rather by doing an initial review rather than the lengthy review that they were doing before. So they do an initial review to ensure that the application fulfills certain initial requirements. And now the goal of this bona fide determination process is for USCIS to get through that backlog of applications quicker so that they can at least issue work permits and protection from deportation to applicants. But, 170,000 is a really big number that grows every day. So even though we have bona fide determination, it is still a slow process for our clients.
Gosh, wow. An easy question turned into very easy information. It's very easy to understand what's happening, but it doesn't make it easy to absorb. So thank you for doing that. I have one last thought over here. So what will it mean for the folks that we serve to get work authorization while they wait?
Yeah, so it's really life-changing, in my opinion, and I've heard clients tell me that too. So once our clients are able to get a work permit while they wait for the final decision on their U visa application, they can also apply for a social security card and they can apply for a driver's license. Now, these basic identification documents allow our clients to do everyday things that others might take for granted. They can board a domestic flight with their driver's license. If they have a social security number, then they're then able to volunteer at their child's school. So really, really life-changing for them. And then more importantly, maybe from a human rights perspective, when our clients have that work permit, it really empowers them to leave jobs where they are often treated unfairly, harassed, or discriminated against just because they lack documented status. So, it really improves their quality of life here while they wait.
Wow. Zena, thank you so much for summing that up and letting us collect all this information in the bucket of U visas. And thank you for your service to our clients at HRI. Zela has been talking about work permits and we've been discussing that. So I'm going to change it up a little bit. And I think we should talk about work permits. Like, what do they mean? So as Zela explained, we briefly talked about this in various buckets already, but just a simple question. Did you know that migrants in the process of immigration need a special application to be able to work? So having an employment authorization document, which is Form I-766 EAD, is one way to prove that you are authorized to work in the United States for a specific time period. To request an EAD, you must file this Form I-765. It's the application for employment authorization. To be eligible for an EAD, you must be 1, an applicant for adjustment of status to permanent resident, which Callie explained earlier what that means. And there are various other things that you must prove. You could be a spouse of an treaty trader, an E2 treaty investor, or L1 intracompany transferee, or a spouse or a child of a J1 exchange. There are all sorts of ways, but if you are in the process of adjusting your visa status, you can apply for it. And while the immigration paperwork is in the pipeline, you are legally allowed to earn a living, which we all need to pay rent and get groceries. But not all migrants may have access to this privilege. To shed more light on this topic, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Antonio Reyes, HRI's G. Raleigh White Trust Asylum Program attorney. With that big title, Antonio, are you ready to tell us some things about EADs? And in fact, that is my first question to you. Can you tell us about what EADs are?
Well, while working,
and perhaps unmute yourself.
can you hear me? I think I did unmute. Yeah. So
this is a daunting subject, which is why even technology is like, maybe you shouldn't learn about it. You know what? We can troubleshoot this. I just wanted to bring this in right after Zila had talked about EADs. While we troubleshoot our EAD spotlight, let's go to another topic. I have lots of them, folks. I have lots of them. Let's talk about MPP, the policy officially known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, and informally known as Remain in Mexico. This was announced by the Trump administration on December 20th, 2018, and was formalized by the Department of Homeland Security in January 2019. This policy invokes the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Why are we stuck over there? Which outlines the inspection and treatment procedures of immigrants coming to the U.S. The administration used concerns about 768,000 immigration court cases as reasoning for this policy. It is my amazing pleasure and word of, request to the technology gods, please let this work, to introduce you to our supervising attorney at HRI, Ms. Corey Sagduyu. Corey, are you here?
Yes, I am. Are you able to hear me?
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. All right. So Corey, let me ask you a simple question. Why is waiting for your asylum case outside of the country so dangerous?
Great question. And to answer your question, it's important to understand how Remain in Mexico is different than traditional asylum processing. If someone is fleeing persecution and gets to the US border without permission to come in, they'll go into a sort of asylum screening process. If they tell a border agent that it's not safe for them to go back to their home country and that they fear persecution, they're supposed to go through a process that is called a credible fear screening. That screening basically asks, assuming that everything that you tell me is true, would you qualify for asylum in the United States? If someone passes, they are supposed to be allowed into the United States, although usually to a detention center, to pursue their asylum case here in the United States and be heard in court. Remain in Mexico changes the normal process and says that even if you pass that screening, you still cannot come into the United States to pursue your case. Instead, you have to figure out where to stay so that you can come back to a tent court at the border whenever the government finally sets your hearing date, which they do not tell you at the time. And this is where a big problem lies. These are asylum seekers, so they have nowhere to go, and they are desperate. They're targeted for serious violence while they're waiting in Mexico, and this can include murder, torture, rape, kidnapping, and other grave attacks. Black asylum seekers have been especially targeted because of their race and nationality, and they've been especially targeted with all of these forms of violence. Because of their race Title 42 and Remain in Mexico are working together to subject people to severe violence.
Well, Corey, thank you for giving that description of what's happening with Title 42 and for the MPP. Why is it harmful to the case?
So this process is extremely
extremely detrimental to these asylum cases because of the lack of counsel. Only 5% of the more than 5,000 people who were placed into the Migrant Protection Protocol program since August 2021 have had lawyers. They are living in transient, unsafe conditions where putting together evidence on their own is nearly impossible. Documents are frequently lost in the shuffle, and Black and Central American Indigenous migrants are often unable to find interpreters as they prepare for their case. Navigating the immigration system is already a huge challenge when folks are inside the United States and have access to legal counsel. So this system is especially designed so that people cannot succeed and cannot access their right to asylum.
Okay, well, thank you, Corey. Can you tell me what changes were made and what's the status of people who are waiting now?
Sure. So ending Remain in Mexico and Title 42 have been top priorities for the immigrants' rights movements, and we were thrilled when the Biden administration formally ended the Remain in Mexico policy in January 2021, after a phased wind down and processing program that began in 2020. Unfortunately, since then, our home state of Texas and the state of Missouri sued the federal government in spring of 2021, arguing that the administration improperly ended the program. Until recently, court decisions forced the administration's hand, keeping the program in place. But on June 30th, so relatively recently, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the case ruling that the administration did act within its authority to end the policy. Additionally, people continue to be returned to potential harm in Mexico under the policy, and advocates are calling on the administration to immediately uphold its commitment to firmly end Remain in Mexico. We are urgently awaiting an announcement on next steps from the administration at this point.
Wow, Corey, my goodness. Oh gosh, it just keeps our buckets are clearly placed and we know what's going on in each bucket, but together they make one hell of a storm, don't they? Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing us. You know what? I just would like to check if Antonio's back. Antonio, come on back and let's talk about the EADs. As I mentioned before, EADs are applications to apply for employment while you wait for your immigration process to go through, but not everyone is privileged for this opportunity, doesn't have the privilege of this opportunity. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Antonio Reyes once again, HRISG Raleigh White Trust Asylum Program Attorney. Antonio, can you tell us about EADs?
Of course. So working while you have an immigration application pending is the exception, not the rule. Most people dealing with the immigration backlog have to wait until their application is approved before they have permission to work. There are some exceptions to that, the main one being for asylum seekers whose applications have been pending for 180 days. And even that wait is a big burden for them. The importance of work authorization is crucial because, as you've mentioned before, you got to work to get funding for food, for housing, for your crucial necessary supplies. It's a big important thing for people to have. So in Texas, work authorization is, it's a practical necessity for most people in getting a driver's license. A lot of people work using their driver's license as for delivery drivers like Uber, DoorDash, stuff like that. So having a driver's license is very crucial to them. And by having the work authorization, that's how they can get their driver's license, and they're tied together. With that said, backlogs throughout the immigration system were happening with work authorization applications as well. This was especially harmful for people waiting for their reauthorization. Through no fault of their own, they were slipping out of status from work just because of the delays. So their cards were getting expired. Their employers were no longer able to keep them employed because they don't want that legal liability. And so their cards expired and their jobs lets them go. They can no longer work. they don't know when their new card is going to come in, and it's a very stressful situation.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Antonio. Gosh. Well, what situations are the migrants facing while they await EADs?
Well, the EAD process is different for all the different application types that we handle. Across all cases, one of the big things we've seen, though, is a delay in processing the EAD renewals, which means people are losing their jobs and their driver's licenses, and for the sole reason that the application got stuck in the backlog. And recently, the administration extended the renewal where certain categories are able to get renewed automatically in an automatic extension, which used to be for 180 days, and that was now extended to 540 days. That hopefully will alleviate this issue for people that are covered under the policy. And again, not all categories, just a select few that qualify, and one of them is asylum.
All right. Well, Antonio, is there any light at the end of the tunnel for EADs?
Yeah, because of the sustained advocacy from folks all across the country, sounding the alarm and crying out in solidarity with folks stuck in the backlog, the Biden administration did make that change. They allowed to auto-extend employment authorization, and they automatically extended authorizations for the year and a half for many types of applicants to mitigate the effect of that backlog. And although this is great news, it came too late for many people who lost their jobs and cannot get back that time. And this is only a stopgap measure. We need a more efficient and workable immigration system that doesn't result in these unreasonable delays.
Right. Wow. Thank you, Antonio. And thank you for the work you're doing with our clients at HRI. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Folks, what do we do? How do we process all this information? Doesn't it make you want to just get up and do something? Because it makes me want to. This is why I actually came and took up this job, because I was like, how can I help? Because this is what I'm hearing through the news media, the research that I do by myself. It was startling to see that there's such a huge backlog. There are people who are being sent back to dangerous situations because of a little known health policy, or there are migrants who are putting their lives in danger, like our Haitian brothers who drowned on Sunday, or the 46 people who lost their life in a suffocating tractor truck. So what do we do? You know what? I will let you meet my very amazing colleague, Ms. Brenda, from our advocacy program. Brenda is our advocacy organizer. Maybe she can tell us a little bit about some of the things that we can do. So Brenda, thank you for being here. Welcome to the HRI community. Tell us, what can we do?
Mariam, I'm so glad you're asking this question. So often it seems like all of this is far-fetched, right? But there are concrete things happening right now that everyone can do. Okay, these are us from across the immigrants' rights movement, and when we add our voices together from all over the country, our individual whispers can come together to really make some noise. I want to emphasize that what we're talking about right now is not abstract policy. We're talking about things that have a huge human cost and have real serious impacts on so many people's lives. The first thing coming up sounds really complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. It's called budget reconciliation. You know, this just means that Congress is passing laws that are connected to our spending. This year, the process is really about lowering healthcare and prescription costs, and, you know, access to affordable healthcare is critical for everyone, including our immigrant communities, especially our immigrant communities. That's why access to affordable healthcare is a top priority for our client-led advocacy group, HRI Connect. Even though the process is supposed to be about healthcare, conservative lawmakers are preparing to throw in as many anti-immigrant amendments at the bill and obstruct the bill in every way they can. and that will put the progress that we have talked about today on today's call in jeopardy. And it will put the better future we're fighting for at even greater risk. So we're getting ready for another big fight. We'll need everyone to be ready and act quickly. This process will probably start next week. Please follow HRI's social media accounts for action and alerts about what to do. One of anti-immigrant measures we're expecting is already circulating throughout Congress. Lawmakers are working hard to try to ignore public health experts and pass legislation that would continue Title 42 indefinitely. We can't let that happen. We heard earlier about the huge human costs of policies like Title 42 and Remain in Mexico. Every day these stay in place, it puts people in grave danger. It's way past their time for their end. And when you get off the call today, people, we ask that you join the Welcome with Dignity call in days and call your senators, your representatives. Check out the link in the chat for the next steps, including a call script. We must keep raising our voices together. We need to demand that lawmakers recognize our basic humanity. We wake up every day, can't imagine what your goal is. Wake up in the morning to remind someone that I am a human. I need to be treated equally. I need to fight for my rights. That's not supposed to be happening, okay? We should not be required to defend the reality that we are living, breathing people that are the same on a planet that none of us even created, okay? But we are here, so let's raise our voices and hold the people in power accountable for what is happening under their watch.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, from our advocacy program. Folks, we must keep raising our voices together, as we just heard from Brenda. We must recognize their basic humanity. We have to hold the people in power accountable, that they cannot continue to do what they're doing, not on our watch. We've given you a few ways to sign up for action, calls to action that we have created. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@hrionline.org. You can email advocacy@hrionline.org. You can email marketing@hrionline.org. Just send us an email. We'll hook you up. We'll tell you ways in which you can stand up and be heard, where you can raise your voices together with us. And if today you're just listening to all this information, to our little containers, our buckets that Callie set up, and then each HRI staff member poured into that bucket and let you know about the immigration backlog, the years that people have to wait until their paperwork even gets to the front of the line, the unbelievable conditions at our southernmost borders, the people who are losing their lives every day because they would rather put their lives in danger than remain where they are. That's how terrible the situations are in various different countries. So one way you can also support the work that HRI does. You can make a tremendous impact in the work that we do every day, and you can give financially. We are nearing the end of our July 4th campaign, and we need your help. We're so grateful to everyone who has already donated, and if you haven't, consider a small gift. Consider giving today. And join our fight for a more just and compassionate immigration systems. You can donate by texting HRI 4th at 44321 or at donate@hrionline.org. Send us an email. Let us help you answer some of the questions. Help us fight this fight, the fight of a lifetime, standing up for our fellow human beings. From the heart of Texas, where our representatives may have a different calculus than us, we, the citizens of Dallas, Texas, show up every day for HRI's mission to help vulnerable immigrants and refugees fleeing from human rights violations find a safe pathway to legal status, to documentation, to however we can help them. 100% free legal and social services. Thank you for joining us today. I was your host, Miriam Baig. Have a great, successful rest of your day. Goodbye from us.